We are continuing our study on the book of Luke called a historical study on the book of Luke. This is teaching number 97, preparing for the unexpected coming of Jesus. This is part 10, and then this is part 7 of Jesus comes as a thief in the night. Preparing for the unexpected coming of Jesus. Jesus comes as a thief in the night, comes out of Luke 12:35 through 48. And we're going to read Luke 12:39 through 40. Jesus said, "But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him." So we've been following the biblical narrative of the coming of Jesus, which we've discussed in many of our previous studies. And we've learned that Jesus was coming to judge unbelieving Israel and to rescue believers throughout the Roman Empire by taking them to heaven. I say the rescuing of the believers that Paul talks about, I think it's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. It could be 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9 and 10, but I think it's 1 Thessalonians. I really think that was the rapture. I think currently, in my understanding of the scriptures, believers were taken to be with Christ prior to the great tribulation upon the land of Israel. And God, through Christ, was coming to bring relief to these first century believers by rescuing them from the wrath to come, taking them out of the persecution they were experiencing. If somebody's joining us on a podcast, if they're on a video, maybe YouTube, and you're just tuning in to this study on Jesus coming like a thief in the night, I would encourage you to go to my website, gracereach.org. Click on the orange button that says Teaching Resources. It'll take you to a blue page. Click on Luke, and then scroll all the way down to number 97. And there you'll find the notes for this Bible study, very detailed notes. And in those notes, I have links to our previous teachings where Jesus spoke about his coming in judgment on unbelieving Israel. He talked about the persecution that unbelieving Israel would have on believing Israel and the judgment that would come as a result. So when we look at Jesus coming as a thief in the night, we cannot isolate Jesus coming as a thief in the night from the biblical narrative. So I put all those links so that you'll follow the biblical narrative, so you can understand what Jesus was referring to when he said that he would come as a thief in the night. And I talk about the rapture in right around teaching number 73, 72, 74, somewhere in that. I have 3 teachings on the rapture. And, you know, all of us believe differently. Not all of us, but most of us believe differently with the scripture. So if you've never heard of a first century rapture, I present the case why I believe in a first century rapture, even though I used to believe in a future rapture. That First Thessalonians chapter 4, starting at, I think, at verse 13, was a future rapture of believers. I now put that into the time period prior to the great tribulation upon the land of Israel, the people of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple from AD 66 to 70. So if you get a chance, listen to that and all the other studies as well. And then that'll bring you to Jesus coming as a thief in the night. In Luke chapter 12, 35 through 48, which we've been in for a while, Jesus tells 3 parables. We've talked about this in our other studies. But the parables were to prepare believers for the long period of time between his ascension and his coming, so that his coming would not be unexpected by the believers. And then Jesus tells the 3 parables to exhort the believers to be ready and to stay watching for his coming. Though it would be a long time between his ascension and his coming, his ascension would have been around AD 30. His coming on the clouds in judgment, which we're going to look at tonight, would have been around between AD 66 and 70, when he came in judgment on first century Israel and Jerusalem and the temple. We're going to really look at some details of that tonight. So in these three parables, the first parable was the parable of the master returning from the wedding banquet. That's Luke 12:35 through 38. We examined that parable in a previous study. Parable number 2 is the parable we're currently on. It's the parable of the owner of the house and the thief. That's Luke 12:39 through 41. And then at some point in our studies, we will get to parable number 3, which is the parable of the faithful, unfaithful, wise, unwise manager. Now, we're continuing with parable number 2, which is the parable of the owner of the house and the thief, out of Luke chapter 12, verses 39 through 40. Let's read that again. Jesus said, "But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would have not let his house be broken into." You, that's first century Old Covenant Israel. You here is not us in our time. It's first century Israel. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in judgment on Israel at an hour when you do not expect him. So Jesus was coming in judgment in the generation of the lives of people to whom he was speaking. So in our previous studies, we examined Matthew chapter 24, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and 2 Peter chapter 3:10 as it relates to Jesus coming as a thief in the night. We began in our past couple studies examining Revelation chapter 3, 1 through 6 as it relates to Jesus coming as a thief in the night. And we're going to continue in this study on Revelation 3, 1 through 6. And Revelation 3, 1 through 6 is dealing with the assembly in Sardis, which was a first century assembly of believers, probably mixed believers, unbelievers in these assemblies. Just like in churches today, they're believers and unbelievers. So that when a pastor is preaching or teaching, he's preaching and teaching to a mixed audience. And I'm sure these assemblies were very similar, that John sends this letter to, the letter of Revelation, and then the specific letters that he sent, or that Jesus sent through John to each specific assembly. So let's read Revelation 3:6, where it talks about, "I will come like a thief." This is written to the assembly in Sardis, where Jesus says, "Remember therefore what you have received and heard, hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you." And then we see similar language in Revelation 16:15, where Jesus says, "Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as to not go naked and be shamefully exposed." So we see this phrase, "coming like a thief," that we first read about in Luke 12:39 through 40. Jesus said, "I will come at an hour like a thief," an unknown hour. If the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, and so Jesus compares his coming to an unknown hour as a thief coming in the night. And so that theme plays itself out in Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 5, 2 Peter 3:10, Revelation 3, 1 through 6, and Revelation 16, 13 through 18. So we want to follow this narrative and see how this Jesus coming as a thief in the night unfolds throughout the Bible. And that's what we're doing. We're looking at the unfolding of this phrase, Jesus coming as a thief in the night. And we're in Revelation chapter 3. If you have the notes, watching on a podcast, a video, some people, most of us were taught, well, Revelation was written around the time of AD 90. There's a lot of scholarly work now that shows that the book of Revelation was actually written prior to AD 70. So you can go to When Was Revelation Written in the gracereach.org website. And I put a lot of articles in there and a lot of resources. So I'll let people read and study and come to their own conclusion when they think Revelation was written. I used to hold to an AD 90 time of when Revelation was written. Honestly, I never really studied it. That's just what I heard people say. So I thought, well, they must be right. But then I begin to see that there are other people who hold to a pre-AD 70, pre-fall of Jerusalem, pre-burning down of the temple in Jerusalem by the Roman armies, that the book of Revelation is actually foretelling the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And Revelation was written prior to AD 70. So I document why a lot of people believe that in that article on my website called When Was Revelation Written? All right, well, let's continue with Revelation 3:1 with this specific letter to the assembly in Sardis, where Jesus said he would come like a thief. So that's in Revelation 3:1 through 6. Revelation chapter 3, verse 1, this is the literal standard version. You can also see the Young's literal translation, which we've studied this verse the past couple studies. Revelation 3:1 says, "And to the messenger of the assembly in Sardis write." So in our previous studies, we examined messenger and assembly. In the NIV, it reads this way: "To the angel," which I think the literal translation, the literal standard version, and Young's literal translation gets it right. Angel, the best translation here is messenger. Revelation 3:1 through 6 of the NIV, "To the angel of the church." The church is not even a translation, it's a word replacement. The literal translation here is assembly, and we talked about that last week. Sometimes I like to use the NIV because not every translation is perfect. They all have their problems, and I try to find the ones that are easier to understand at the same time, which are accurate in the verses that we're studying. And if I don't think they're accurate, I'll point it out and let other people go study it out themselves and arrive at their own conclusions. But Revelation 3:1 through 6, Jesus is telling John to write a letter to the assembly in Sardis. And he says, "These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of or from God," which we looked at in our previous studies. I think these were prophets sent out into the land of Israel. And I explained why I believe that in our previous study. "These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of or from God and the seven stars." And that's what we're going to concentrate on in the first part of our study here. Who are the seven stars? Because we're wanting to understand Revelation 3:1 through 6. So it has words in here and phrases that's been talked about in Revelation chapter 1. So we got to go back to Revelation 1 to understand what the seven stars are. Who are the seven stars? We looked last week at who are the seven spirits of Revelation 3:1 through 6. So who are these seven stars of Revelation 3:1 through 6? Revelation 1:12 through 20 identify the seven stars as the seven messengers of the seven assemblies in Roman Asia Minor, which is the coast of modern day Turkey. So Roman Asia Minor was in the first century. Today, that's the coast of modern day Turkey. Let's read Revelation 1:12 through 20. "I, John, turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and when I turned, I saw seven golden lampstands." Now, these lampstands we're going to see momentarily are the seven assemblies in Roman Asia Minor who were to shine the light of Jesus in their communities. So John sees the seven golden lampstands, these seven assemblies. And among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand, he held seven stars. So that takes us to Revelation chapter 3:1 through 6, because the letter is being written to the seven stars. In his right hand, he held seven stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp, double-edged sword. So that means judgment. It's coming on these seven assemblies. So he's coming to judge not only Israel, but it seems like he's coming in judgment on these seven assemblies as well in that first century judgment. which is why he was coming as a thief in the night on the assembly of Sardis. And so we'll get more into that in our next study, but we're leading up to that now. His face was like the sun shining in all of its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades." If you're interested in learning more about that, I go into a lot of detail in Revelation Volume 1, War of the Saints, on death and Hades and what that meant, because it comes back around in Revelation chapter 6. It comes back around in Revelation chapter 20, death and Hades. And it represents the law of Moses. And I show that in the book War on the Saints. All right, verse 19 of Revelation 1. "Write therefore what you have seen and what is now and what will take place later. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this." The 7 stars are the angels, and remember the word angel is the word messenger. So the NIV uses angel, but the literal translation, literal standard translation, and Young's literal translation uses the word messengers. To me, these are the leaders of the angels, the 7 stars, the messengers are the leaders of the church, of the 7 churches. And that's what we read about here. "The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the messengers of the 7 assemblies." Again, it's not churches. The word church is not a biblical term. It's assemblies. The 7 stars are the messengers of the 7 assemblies. The assemblies are in Revelation 1:4. They're the assemblies that's in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, located in Roman Asia Minor in the 1st century, which is now the western and southwestern regions of modern-day Turkey on the coast. And the 7 lampstands are the 7 assemblies. So the 7 stars are the leaders of the assembly, and the lampstands are the actual 7 assemblies. All right. The coming of Jesus as a thief would be during the time of these 7 assemblies. That's really important because so many people put the book of Revelation into the future. But these 7 assemblies were real assemblies. They were real gatherings of people who these letters were written to. So if these letters weren't for them, and they have no bearing on them, and the coming of Jesus like a thief on them, why are the letters even written to them? And we're going to see that the time statements in Revelation puts the second coming of Christ, puts Jesus coming like a thief in the night, directly in the 1st century, leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. The coming of Jesus as a thief would be during the time of the 7 assemblies, not during our time. And this is indicated in Revelation 1 through 3, and in the specific letter written to the assembly in Thyatira. Remember, Jesus said, this is a revelation that's going to happen soon. It's a revelation of judgment that's near. That's in Revelation 1 through 3. And so in Revelation 2:25, there's an assembly in Thyatira where Jesus says, "Now I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, hold on to what you," not us, them, "what you have until I come." So he's putting his coming on the clouds directly during the time of 1st century Thyatira. And then again, we looked in Revelation 1 through 3 that Jesus said his coming was soon and near. So the soon and near coming of Jesus in judgment on Old Covenant Israel would be during the time of the 7 assemblies in the 1st century. One of these assemblies was Sardis, to whom Jesus said his coming would be like a thief, which takes us back to Luke chapter 12. Again, in Revelation 3:3, Jesus said to the assembly in Sardis that I will come like a thief. So Jesus places his coming in the time of the assembly of Sardis, which is in the first century. And again, in Luke 12:39 through 40, Jesus told that audience that he would be coming like a thief. The coming of Jesus, the coming at an hour like a thief when people wouldn't expect him. We read about the coming of Jesus in Matthew 26:47 through 68, where Jesus was taken before the Sanhedrin. He had been arrested. The Sanhedrin is the leaders of the nation of Israel. They make the decisions for the nation. So Jesus was taken before the Sanhedrin, the leaders of Israel in the first century, leading up to AD 70. So that's your Sanhedrin. They're in charge leading up to AD 70. Jesus is taken before them around the time of AD 30. And then Jesus told the members of the Sanhedrin, right around the time of AD 30, that they, the members of the Sanhedrin, would see him coming on the clouds of heaven. Let's read this. Matthew 26:63 through 64 says, the high priest, that's the leader of the Sanhedrin, the leader of the leaders, the high priest, the leader of the Sanhedrin, said to Jesus, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Christ. And Jesus said, you have said so. So Jesus is saying, yes, I'm the Messiah. I'm the Christ. And then Jesus replied, but I say to all of you. So Jesus is now talking to the Sanhedrin, the leaders of Israel and the leader of the leaders of Israel, the high priest. But I say to all of you, from now on, you, the Sanhedrin, at the time of AD 30, will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. So now he's predicting his resurrection. He knows they're going to kill him. He's predicting his resurrection and ascension. He said, you, the Sanhedrin, will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. And remember, interesting, in Acts chapter 7, this same group of people called for the killing of Stephen. And prior to Stephen dying, he looks up to heaven and Jesus is standing at the right hand of God. And it makes you wonder, did the Sanhedrin also see this? Did they have that same vision that Stephen had? Is this when they saw the Sanhedrin, Jesus, in this case, he's not sitting, he was standing at the right hand of the Mighty One. But he told the Sanhedrin, you will see me coming on the clouds of heaven. You will. So he's putting his coming on the clouds of heaven directly during the time and the generation of the Sanhedrin that had arrested him. And then the high priest in verse 65 of Matthew 26 says, then the high priest tore his clothes and said, well, why is he tearing his clothes? Because he understood exactly what Jesus was saying. He understood that Jesus was saying that an army was going to come and destroy Jerusalem. Now, when we read this, we think, oh, Jesus is physically coming on the clouds. They didn't understand it that way because they understood the Hebrew Bible. They knew that Jesus was foretelling that an army was going to destroy Jerusalem and the temple. And Jesus had already said that in Luke 19. He already had said that in Matthew 22. He had already said that in Luke chapter 21 and Matthew chapter 24 and Mark 13. So Jesus is speaking in the language, using the words of the Hebrew people that they understood, which are directly out of the Hebrew scriptures, when God would pour out judgment on a nation. We don't understand that because we were never taught it. And again, not to criticize pastors, because most pastors really aren't Bible students. They're not studiers of the scripture. They've got a sermon to prepare for Sunday and they go prepare a sermon. But more and more pastors are beginning to understand how to study the Bible. They have the resources to accurately communicate to their to their congregations the truth of the scriptures now. So we're going to see more and more people teaching what I'm sharing with you tonight. And you see it. You guys are all smart people, whether you're listening on a podcast or whether you're watching on a video. You're smart people. You see this. We don't need to depend upon our pastors to help us understand the Bible. We have access to resources today. A lot of times, pastors, we can help our pastors understand the Bible. We can show our pastors these things. And it's okay to show our pastors these things. And hopefully they have the humility to at least consider what you may be seeking to help them understand. But the high priest certainly understood. He knew exactly what Jesus was saying, that Jerusalem would be destroyed, that the temple would be destroyed when Jesus came on the clouds of heaven. And they knew he wasn't talking about a physical coming through the clouds. They knew this was directly from the Hebrew Bible of judgment on a nation by an army. So they called for the death of Jesus in verse 66. He is worthy of death. So you have the leader of the leaders of Israel who were antichrists. They were against Christ. That's who John is writing about in 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. The Antichrist. They were against Jesus. They were calling for his death. They spit in his face, verse 67. They struck him with their fist. Doesn't get more Antichrist than this. They were against Jesus being the Messiah because they asked Jesus, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ?" He said, "It's as you have said." They didn't like that. They were antichrist. They were against Christ. And they slapped him, they hit him, they beat him. And they said, mocking him, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" So there are your antichrists that John talks about in 1 John and 2 John and 3 John. All right. So the Sanhedrin understood that Jesus was pronouncing God's judgment upon the Sanhedrin. They understood that Jesus was prophesying an army would come against the Sanhedrin and Israel to destroy the land, the people, Jerusalem, and the temple. They also understood that Jesus was the person who would direct the military campaign against Israel. And that sounds a little odd. Jesus? I thought he was full of grace. If you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus had a lot of judgment language that he used to the nation of Israel. Because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are Old Covenant. They're not New Testament. There's really no such thing as New Testament books. There's the New Testament, which is a new covenant in the blood of Christ. There's the Old Testament or the Old Covenant in the blood of animals. There are no such things as Old Testament books or New Testament books. That's something man created, the whole table of contents. It does more harm than good, even though people meant good when they created the table of contents. So when you open up Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're right in the time of Old Covenant law. And Jesus is pronouncing Old Covenant judgment on the nation of Israel. If somebody doesn't understand that when they read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're just not going to understand Jesus and his message and his words to first century Israel. So the Sanhedrin understood that Jesus was the person he's claiming that he's going to be the one to direct the military campaign against Israel. And that sounds odd, but I want to show you that it's not odd. Just as God directed the Babylonian army against Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC, you can read about that in Jeremiah, you can read about it in Lamentations. Jesus would direct the Roman armies against Jerusalem and the temple from AD 66 to 70. I want you feel free to turn there now if you want, but I'm going to read this verse here in a minute. I have it in our notes. Matthew 22:7. It's the parable of the wedding banquet. We're not going to understand the parable of the wedding banquet if we don't understand it against the historical background of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. That's what the parable of the wedding banquet's about in Matthew 22:7. And in this parable, Jesus says in Matthew 22:7, it's about a king sending his army. So we're going to see this. It's a king sending his army to destroy the murderers and burn down the city. This is a direct reference to the burning down of Jerusalem and the temple by the Roman armies. So the parable of Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding banquet, was about the people and the leaders of Israel who rejected Jesus and who murdered his servants, the servants of Jesus. The servants were those inviting people to believe in Jesus as the Christ, and the Roman army was sent by Jesus to destroy the murderers and burn down Jerusalem and the temple. Look at Matthew 22, 6 through 7. The rest seized his servants. These are the believers in Christ who were sent out into the Roman Empire, into the land of Israel to share the good news of Jesus. Paul himself said, I am a servant. Peter said, I am a servant. John was a servant. Timothy was a servant. These are words. They're serving the purposes of Christ. They're carrying out the message of Christ. The rest seized his servants, the rest being the unbelievers in Israel in the context, seized the servants of Jesus, mistreated them, and killed them. It's exactly what Jesus said would happen to the believers in Israel. The king, who is Jesus in the parable, was enraged. The king sent his army, which is the Roman army, and destroyed those murderers and burned down their city. Who are the murderers? Unbelieving Israel. Who was the first person they murdered after the ascension of Jesus? Stephen. And they continued to murder believers. And eventually the Roman army burned down Jerusalem and the temple. That's what Matthew 22, 6 through 7 is about. Revelation 19 through 41 is the fulfillment of the words of Jesus to the Sanhedrin. You will see me coming on the clouds. And it's the fulfillment of the words of Jesus in the parable of the wedding banquet in Matthew 22, 6 through 7. In Revelation 19, you have Jesus who rules the nations with an iron scepter. The word rule in Revelation 19 through 41, he rules the nation with an iron scepter. That's why it's so important. We've got to look behind the translations and the words the translations use. The word, Jesus rules the nations with an iron scepter, is not the word rule. And that totally changes the narrative. It's the word shepherd. Jesus shepherds the nations with an iron scepter. The iron scepter is the Roman Empire. The nations are the armies of the Roman Empire. And Jesus shepherds, or he gathers, he leads, he gathers these armies of the nations and directs them to Jerusalem. He directs them to the temple, exactly like God did with the Babylonian armies in the book of Jeremiah. The Babylonian army God was directing the Babylonian army to destroy Jerusalem and the temple, which is exactly what the old covenant called for in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. So Jesus is speaking out of Leviticus 26. He's speaking out of Deuteronomy 28. He's speaking to old covenant Israel. And these old covenant judgments are what's happening in Revelation. And the final judgment would be when Jesus directed the Roman armies to destroy Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. Okay. So let's examine more fully Jesus coming on the clouds and judgment of first century old covenant Israel. Coming on the clouds and judgment would have been a very familiar phrase to Jewish people in the first century, because in the Hebrew Bible, God described, using cloud imagery, God described his coming in judgment of nations, and he did that using cloud imagery. That's why the Sanhedrin understood when Jesus said, "You will see me coming on the clouds." Well, they understood Jeremiah chapter 4. They understood Isaiah chapter 19. They understood the imagery of coming on the clouds and what that meant. They knew Jesus was talking about an army coming to destroy them, that his coming on the clouds wasn't physical. It was metaphorical, meaning he's coming on the clouds A whirlwind is coming. A storm is coming. The clouds are brewing. Dark clouds are gathering against Israel. That's how Jeremiah puts it. That's how Isaiah puts it. But we've never been taught that. And again, I don't criticize pastors. That they're coming into the light now. They're beginning to see, understand the scriptures now. All right. So Jesus coming on the clouds in judgment is similar to when Jeremiah prophesied to the leaders of Jerusalem that God would advance against them like the clouds. God would advance against them like the clouds through the Babylonian army. So coming on the clouds was Old Covenant metaphorical Hebrew language describing judgment on a nation, as in Jeremiah chapter 4. So let's read this. Jeremiah 4, 11 through 17. This is judgment on Judah, Israel, southern Israel. Judgment on Judah and Jerusalem. At that time, this people and Jerusalem, the people of Judah and people of the city of Jerusalem, will be told, a scorching wind. So this is the cloud imagery. A scorching wind from barren heights in the desert blows toward my people, but not to winnow or cleanse. A wind too strong for that. A wind too strong for that comes from me. Now I pronounce my judgments against them. So these are judgments that God's pronouncing on Jerusalem and Judah, and Jesus was pronouncing these same judgments in his time on Jerusalem and Judah. Verse 13, this is God talking through Jeremiah. Look, he advances like the clouds. That's God advancing like the clouds. And then look what this says. His chariots, these are the chariots of the Babylonian armies. His chariots come like a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. So when Jesus is said in Revelation 19, that he's riding on horses, he's not really riding on horses. It's imagery. It's taken directly from the Hebrew Bible. It's judgment. The horses is a literal army that's coming against Jerusalem. So in Revelation 19, Jesus is not riding on horses. The Roman army is riding on horses. And he's directing the Roman army and the armies of the nations to Jerusalem, just like God did in Jeremiah. Look, he advances like the clouds. His chariots come like a whirlwind. So they're his chariots. Whose chariots are they? They're God's chariots. So the chariots of the Babylonians were the chariots of God that he was using to pronounce judgment on Jerusalem and Judah. Look, he advances like the clouds. His chariots come like a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, the people of Israel said. The people of Jerusalem said. The people of Judah said. We are ruined. 14 of Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 14. Jerusalem, watch the evil from your heart and be saved. Saved from what? Saved from the Babylonian armies coming to destroy them. How long will you harbor wicked thoughts? A voice announcing from Dan, proclaiming disaster from the hills of Ephraim. That's two of the tribes of Israel. Verse 16, tell this to the nations, proclaim concerning Jerusalem. Here it is. A besieging army. That's the Babylonian army, would build sieges around the cities of Israel, ultimately around the city of Jerusalem, is coming from a distant land, raising a war cry against the cities of Judah. They surround her like men guarding a field because she has rebelled against me. So here is God advancing on the clouds, and God's really not in the clouds. It's all imagery to describe the coming of the Babylonian army to destroy Jerusalem. So when Jesus told the Sanhedrin in Matthew chapter 26, verse 64, that you will see me coming on the clouds, their mind went directly to Jeremiah 4, 11 through 17. Jesus is talking about an army coming against us. We're going to kill him. All right. So that's what was going on. Look in Isaiah 19:1. God rode on a swift cloud when judging Egypt. This is the burden against Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. Did he really come on a cloud? Did Yahweh really ride on a cloud? No. It's imagery. This is the burden against Egypt. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. He is coming to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians will melt within them. So how did God come in judgment on Egypt, riding on a swift cloud? God used the Assyrian army to bring judgment on Egypt. Jesus coming on the clouds to judge first century Israel is to be understood in the same way. Jesus would come on the clouds in judgment upon first century Israel. However, just as with God in Jeremiah 4:13 and Isaiah 19:1, coming on the clouds is not to be taken literally, but figuratively. Advancing on the clouds, riding on the cloud, coming on a cloud are all Hebrew ways of communicating judgment on a nation by an army. Jesus coming on the clouds was Jesus bringing judgment on first century Israel using the armies of the Roman Empire. The army coming against first century Old Covenant Israel was the Roman army. And this was the Jewish-Roman war from AD 66 to AD 70. The Roman army was directed by Jesus as he came on the clouds against Israel, against Jerusalem, against Judah. You can read about that in Revelation 19:11 through 21. Jesus coming on the clouds is Jesus coming as a thief against Old Covenant Israel. And this is what Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 are all about. This is what 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 3 is about. It's what 2 Peter chapter 3 is about, which we've looked at those in previous studies. So Jesus is carrying out the final Old Covenant law-based judgment on Israel. These law-based judgments are in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 through 32. His coming on Israel would be sudden and unexpected, like a thief in the night. His coming would end the Old Covenant age. And this is what Revelation is about. So Revelation 1:7 continues the theme of Jesus coming on the clouds to judge first century Old Covenant Israel. Let's read Revelation chapter 1, verse 7 out of the literal standard version. Behold, he comes with the clouds. So that's right out of Matthew 24, 24:64. And he also said it, it's right out of Matthew 26:64. But he also talked about coming on the clouds in Matthew 24. All right. So Revelation 1:7, literal standard version. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him. So now we know, coming with the clouds. When we read Revelation 7, it's not physical. One day people are going to look up and everybody's going to see Jesus. Oh, there he is. CNN's going to have him, and Fox is going to have him, and everybody's going to see Jesus come. That's not the biblical narrative at all. That's what I used to think. That's what I used to teach. That's what I heard people teach. But then I began studying the Bible. Really studying the Bible. So when Revelation 1:7 says he comes with the clouds, it takes us back to Jeremiah chapter 4. It takes us back to Isaiah 19. This is judgment. This is an army coming against Israel. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 26:64 and Matthew 24. It's what he was talking about in Luke 19 when a siege was built against Israel. Revelation 1:7, behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him. Now, this is specifically referring to the 12 tribes of Israel. The every eye is not every eye in the world. The context and the verses itself tell us it's every eye of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the 12 tribes of Israel don't exist today. The people who make up modern day Israel aren't of the 12 tribes of Israel. They're people from the nations. It's a modern day nation made up of lots of different people, like the United States of America. People came from a lot of different countries to form the United States. Same with Israel. Israel's a modern day nation made up of people who need Jesus. They need the gospel. They need to hear about Christ. The Israel of God are those who believed in Jesus. The true Israel in the time of Jesus was the believers in Christ. The false Israel were those who rejected Christ. The descendants of Abraham were those who believed in Jesus as Messiah. That's in Galatians 3 and Romans 4. So behold, Jesus comes with, or he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him. This is specifically referring to the tribes of Israel in the first century, seeing Jesus was seeing the judgment he brought upon Israel. The entire Roman Empire was affected by the judgment. It was one of the most significant events in world history that very few people know about, unfortunately. It's not their own fault, it's just not communicated. People all over the world today see the Temple Mount and the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. All right, that was Jesus coming on the clouds. He destroyed the temple. He destroyed Jerusalem. So behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. Now, who are those? Those are the Roman soldiers. So if we look in John 19:37, when the Romans saw Jesus, they had pierced him. And all the tribes of the land, a lot of verses have earth. Again, we've talked about this a lot. This is the land. So the 12 tribes existed in the land of Israel. This is the tribes of the land of Israel. Most translations have earth. The biblical narrative is the land of Israel, as in Luke 21:23. These are the same tribes of the land in Revelation 7:4-8. Now, the 10 of the tribes had been scattered throughout the Roman Empire, but those who understood that they were Jews, they would come back into the land. They would come back to Jerusalem. Even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the land will wail, that's mourn, because of the judgment brought upon Israel when Jesus came on the clouds against them. That's why they're wailing. Will wail because of him. So remember, there would be great distress in the land of Israel because of God's wrath on the people of Israel. That's in Luke 21:5-27. And the distress occurred from AD 66 to AD 70 during the Jewish-Roman War. That's when the wailing came. That's when they looked up and they saw Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven, so to speak. Well, really, they're looking at the Roman armies coming against them. So every eye seeing Jesus coming in judgment is referring to the tribes of the land of Israel. Not only would the tribes of Israel see Jesus coming on the clouds, the Romans would also see Jesus coming on the clouds. Again, seeing Jesus coming on the clouds is figurative language for judgment of a nation, as in Jeremiah 4, as in Isaiah 19. Now, in Revelation, the nation being judged by Jesus was first century Israel. The army bringing the judgment for Jesus was first century Rome, the Roman armies. So in this way, the tribes of Israel and the Roman armies saw Jesus coming in judgment. Now, John quotes part of Revelation 1:7 when he writes in John 19:36-37 these words. These things happen, so these things being Jesus being crucified and his bones not being broken, says these things happen so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced. Let's continue reading. Let's read about this. They will look on the one they have pierced is a direct statement concerning the Roman soldiers who pierced Jesus in the side. That's 1934. So Revelation 1:7 says, again, behold, he comes with the clouds. That's judgment, bringing an army against Israel. The army's the Roman soldiers. He comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, every eye of the tribes of Israel, even those who pierced him, the Roman soldiers, and all the tribes of the land, should not be earth here, land, will wail because of him. Why? Because of judgment. Every eye will see Jesus is specifically describing the tribes of Israel experiencing the judgment brought upon them by the Roman armies. So the tribes of Israel and the Roman armies saw Jesus coming in judgment in the first century when the land, people, and cities of Israel were judged. The culmination of this judgment was the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. That's when the city burned, as in Matthew 22:7. Now, is it possible Jesus was seen by the tribes of Israel and the Roman soldiers? Possible, because there are historical accounts that indicate something was being seen at the time of the judgment on Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. So I would encourage people to go get the notes. I have these historical accounts of Josephus, and a couple others, Tacitus, historians, that something was seen above Jerusalem. So there's historical documentation. Maybe there was some physical seeing Jesus at that time. All right, it's important to understand that when Revelation 1:7 states, every eye will see Jesus, it's not referring to every person around the world. Many people view it this way because most translations have all the tribes of the earth will mourn in Revelation 1:7. However, the Greek word gi is translated as earth and land. In Matthew 2:6, Matthew 2:20, Matthew 27:45, gi or gay is translated as land of Judah and land of Israel. So why wouldn't it be translated as land in Revelation 1:7? Well, it can be. The translators just chose the word earth in the NIV. In Luke 21:23, gay is translated as the land of Israel. Same Greek word as in Revelation 7. In Matthew 24:30, the International Standard Version and the Anderson New Testament translate gay as land when referring to the tribes of the land of Israel. Matthew 24:30 in the International Standard Version. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the tribes of the land will mourn. Again, it's the same Greek word of Revelation 1:7. It's talking about the tribes of Israel there. And when Jesus would come on the clouds, the tribes of Israel would see him coming in judgment. So we're following that narrative, going all the way back to Jeremiah 4 and Isaiah 19. Anderson New Testament also uses the word land. So when we see the word land is used by the Literal Standard Version, now we go back to Revelation 1:7 because this is the narrative that Jesus is coming against the tribes of Israel in the land of Israel. And Revelation's picking up on the narrative. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, the tribes of Israel, and even those who pierced him, the Roman soldiers, and all the tribes of the land. That's sticking very consistent with the narrative. Will wail. Why would they be wailing? Because Jerusalem was burning. The temple was burning. They will wail because of him. And then in Revelation 7:4, then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from the tribes of Israel. So we know the tribes of Revelation 1:7 are the same tribes of Revelation 7:4, which are the tribes of the land of Israel. The tribes of Israel would wail and mourn because of the judgment brought upon Israel when Jesus came on the clouds against them. Jesus said there would be great distress in the land of Israel because of God's wrath on the people of Israel. That's why they're wailing and mourning. And that's in Luke 21:5-27. So the distress talked about in Luke 21:5-27 occurred from AD 66 to AD 70 during the Jewish-Roman War. That's what Jesus was describing. Jesus described the time of distress, mourning and wailing, in Luke 19:41-44. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when that's Jerusalem's enemies, that's the Roman soldiers, will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. That's a siege. And sieges are found in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. They're old covenant judgments. They will circle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within the walls. There's the wailing. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So that's why they're wailing. That's why they're mourning. That's why they're crying in Revelation 1:7. And in Revelation 21, it says there will be no more death, mourning, crying, and pain. It's referring to no more old covenant law-based judgments. That this was the final judgment that heaven would pour out on earth and on Jerusalem. All right, Jesus also described the time of distress, mourning, and wailing in Luke 23:26-30. As the soldiers led Jesus away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed Jesus, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to the women, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Do not mourn for me. Do not wail for me. Weep for yourselves, mourn for yourselves, wail for yourselves and for your children. Why? Because there would be a siege built around Jerusalem and they would have no food. And mothers are watching their children starve to death. And that's the wailing, that's the mourning of Revelation chapter 1, verse 7. For the time will come when you will say, Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Because the time of the siege would be so bad for women whose children were starving to death. So Revelation 1:7 is describing Jesus coming on the clouds as a thief in the night on unbelieving Israel in the first century. Jesus coming on the clouds can only be a first century event, not a future event, because Jesus would be seen by those who pierced him. Those who pierced him were the Roman soldiers. So how could it be a future event if Jesus would be seen by those who pierced him? Those who pierced him were the Roman soldiers. So the Roman soldiers saw Jesus coming in judgment on the tribes of Israel. This piercing was in AD 33. Some calendars say AD 30, depending upon which one they're using. When Jesus was pierced in the side by the Roman soldier in the presence of other Roman soldiers, John 19:31 through 37. According to Revelation 1:7, the Roman soldiers would see Jesus coming on the clouds in judgment on first century Israel. The tribes of Israel would also see Jesus coming on the clouds in judgment of first century Israel. Now, the 12 tribes ceased to exist after those in the tribes were killed. So over 1 million in Israel were killed during the Jewish-Roman War. Nearly 100,000 were taken into captivity by the Roman soldiers, which is, again, directly connected to Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. And about these killings and about the captivity, Jesus spoke these words in Luke 21:24. Those of the tribes of Israel, will fall by the sword. That means they would die by the swords of the Roman armies. So if you've ever seen any documentaries on AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman soldiers, it's a pretty graphic documentary. They fell by the sword. Israel will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all nations. The word sword and taken as prisoners, again, comes right out of Leviticus 26, right out of Deuteronomy 28 through 32. These are Old Covenant judgments. These are the same judgments of Revelation. Another way to view every eye seeing Jesus coming on the clouds of judgment is the idea of understanding. When communicating with the Jewish people who rejected Jesus as the Christ, Jesus said that they did not have eyes to see or ears to hear. He's talking about spiritual eyes, eyes that understand. They had physical eyes, but Jesus is talking metaphorically here. They didn't have eyes to see and eyes to hear what Jesus was saying. They didn't want to hear what he was saying, the nation of Israel, meaning they were unwilling to listen to or learn from Jesus. They were unwilling to understand in Matthew 13, 14 through 15 what Jesus was saying. Now, Jeremiah and Ezekiel use a similar language when describing the hearts of Israel to the prophets who warned them of the judgment to come. Look in Jeremiah 5:21. Hear, O this, O foolish and senseless people. That's Israel. Who have eyes but do not see, who have ears but do not hear. Jesus often quotes from the Hebrew Bible, but because we've never been taught these connections, we don't know he's quoting from the Hebrew Bible. And he's quoting the same things Jeremiah said and Ezekiel said and Isaiah said concerning judgment on Israel. Look at Ezekiel 12:2. Son of man, you are living in a rebellious house. That's Israel in Ezekiel 12:2. They have eyes to see, but do not see, ears to hear, but do not hear. They are a rebellious house. So when Jesus says that about Israel, he's talking about they're a rebellious people. They've rejected me as Christ. They've rejected the law. They're living in disobedience to the law. They're about to commit murder of believers. So just as the people of Israel refused to listen to Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they did not desire to understand what Jesus was saying either. They wouldn't listen to Jesus. They didn't have eyes to see or ears to hear. They did not want to know what Jesus was saying. However, when the Roman armies brought judgment on Israel, the people of Israel would see, at that point, they would see, this is Jesus coming in judgment. He warned us about this. He told us about this. We see now. We understand now what Jesus said about coming on the clouds in judgment. Yeah, we see it now. So maybe that's what every eye will see Jesus come. Maybe it's perception. Maybe it's understanding. It could be a combination of everything we taught about tonight. So however, just as the people of Israel refused to listen to Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they did not desire to understand what Jesus was saying either. However, when the Roman armies brought judgment on Israel, they would see Jesus coming on the clouds by understanding Jesus was bringing judgment on them through the Roman armies. So let's finish this study by answering this question. Did every eye see Jesus coming on the clouds in the first century? And the answer is yes. Every tribe of Israel saw Jesus coming on the clouds in judgment of first century Israel. Those who pierced Jesus, which was the Roman soldiers, they also saw Jesus coming on the clouds in judgment of first century Israel. So what we'll do, and we'll pick up in our next study, we'll continue to study Luke 12:39 through 40. We'll continue looking in Revelation 3:1 through 6, because we're moving toward understanding what Jesus said when he said that he would come like a thief in the night on first century Israel.